Before talking about informational and normative influences, let's first talk a little bit about conformity. Let's consider a couple of examples. Say you're sitting in a classroom, listening to a lecture on statistics. All of a sudden, an alarm goes off. You're not sure if this is a real thing, so what should you do? In response to the alarm, everyone else in the class, including the lecturer, quickly heads out of the emergency door. What would you do in this situation? Do you stay put, or do you follow? Here's another situation. You're sitting in the audience at a concert you're not really enjoying all that much. You went along with your friends because they talked you into it, but you're really not digging it. Once the last song is done, the audience rises for a standing ovation. What do you do? Do you stay seated, or do you stand up and clap with everyone else? If in either of these situations you do what others are doing, you are conforming. Conformity is the tendency to adjust behavior to what others are doing or to adhere to cultural norms. There are two main reasons why people conform. Sometimes we conform because others are a valuable source of information and appear to know what we're supposed to do. This is called informational social influence, and it's basically following the crowd because they're right. This is what makes us follow others in the first situation when the fire alarm went off. The other reason we follow others is because we want to be accepted and follow social rules. This is called normative social influence and is driven by the desire to be liked, or at the very least not to stand out. This is likely what makes us join in a standing ovation, even if we weren't impressed by the performance. In the 1950s, Solomon Asch set out to investigate why people conform. He designed a simple yet clever experiment to test the power of group pressure. He told participants they'd be doing a perceptual task judging the length of lines, as shown here. They had to match a standard line, shown on the left, to one of 3 comparison lines, shown on the right. This is a pretty simple task with a glaringly obvious answer, but Asch rigged it so that this was done in a group of 6 to 9 Confederates, shown in black, and 1 actual participant, shown in red. There were several trials and everyone gave their answers out loud, which enabled Asch to manipulate group pressure. On some trials, the Confederates were instructed to give the right answer. On other trials, the majority gave the wrong answer. Asch referred to these as critical trials. The actual participant was always one of the last to respond. So what did he do? Let's have a look at how the minority participants did compared to controls, who did the line length judgments alone. Only 5% made mistakes when doing the task on their own, while 76% made mistakes at least once when they did this task out loud with a group. Now, knowing the percentage of people who caved in to the group doesn't really tell us how often they did it. Some of those who were swayed by the group made errors on lots of trials, and others only once or twice. So if we look at it as a percentage of the trials where errors were made, participants on their own only made mistakes on 0.7 of the trials, while in a group, mistakes were made 37% of the time. So clearly, Asch showed that many people will be swayed by the group for some of the time, even if they're clearly wrong. But was this because of informational or normative influences? It's difficult to tell from these 2 conditions alone, but Asch added another condition to address this question. In this condition, after hearing the responses of the majority, a participant reported their answers in writing, rather than out loud. That way, the group never knew what line the minority participant chose. Therefore, if the participant was going along with the group because he figured they knew the answer, under these conditions, the errors should be about the same as the control group that did it on their own. However, if conformity was due to wanting to fit in, then the level of conformity on the critical trials should be much less for the written condition compared to the out loud condition. So what happened when people reported on the critical trials privately? If we look at the data on the percentage of participants who gave the wrong answer, it was slightly lower than in the written condition, 64 compared to 76%. But this was still way more than the controls. However, if we look at the percentage of trials where participants made errors, it was only 12% compared to 37%. So what does this all mean? These results reveal that when we're faced with group pressure, many of us will cave in. By comparing public and private responses, it appears that both normative and informational forces were at work, although for this type of task, it was likely the normative influences that had the upper hand. Sort of like the standing ovation when you didn't enjoy the show. In addition to collecting data on percentage who conformed and percentage of trials where people made errors, Ash later straight up asked these guys why they went along, even though the group was making obviously wrong answers. Here's some of what they said. I felt the need to conform. Mob psychology builds up on you. It is hard to be in a minority. You always like to go along and be like everybody else. When in Rome, you do as the Romans. These statements smack of normative influence, motivated by fitting in with the crowd. So these bizarre findings from this simple experiment highlight that what the group thinks and does has a pretty big influence on how we behave.